Hello and welcome to Something to Think About with me, Mark Hill. I'm filming on location if you're watching this rather than listening on the podcast. I'm downstairs in the British Bible School library room, which is actually now housed in our church building. These books are available for people to borrow. By reading books, of course, it gives us much to think about. And so if you're passing this way or there's a particular book you might think you need to help with your study, then please do let us know. They're available for people to use. But anyway, the book I want to bring a something to think about from is the book of Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 18 and the first 10 verses, and some things that arise from the discussion that the disciples have with Jesus there. In Matthew 18, and beginning at verse 1, he says, "About that time the disciples came to Jesus and asked, 'Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?'" Jesus has been telling his disciples, of course, about his passing. He's going to die, and they are wondering who's going to take his place when he's gone. Who will be the greatest? Who will step up the ladder to take control of this group as they lead into their revolution or whatever it is they have in their mind that they think is going to happen? Wanting to be the greatest, of course, has been a problem from the very beginning of time. Way back in the beginning, Adam, whose name means human, and Eve, whose name means life, and together they brought human life, had everything they needed, but they still wanted more, it seemed. Satan made them a promise that they could be equal with God, and rather than being satisfied with what they had, this led to them thinking of what life might be like if they were able to climb up that ladder a little bit. So Satan made his promise that they would be equal with God because God really only wanted to keep them down. After they disobeyed God, of course, where there was love and unity, where once their two were one flesh, and where there was selflessness, then came spite and division and egotistical power grabbing, all because of sin, all because they were disobedient to God and didn't want to live his way. There is a desire now, of course, for one to be greater or better than another. Are men better than women? Is one culture better than another culture? Is one job or career more meaningful than another? Are you better for having a degree than just having an A-level, or whatever the latest certificate might be when you're hearing this? What is it that we want, and how do we define greatness? What do you want from your education, for example, if you're a student? What is it that you're looking for? Is it to be greater than others, to be recognised as the most intelligent in your field? For those already in work, what part does your relationship with Jesus play in your work or your career? Are you progressing just for the money or for the prestige or to be greater than others? What example are you setting for those who are studying and coming behind you? What is it all for? Is it just to be greater than the next person? The disciples here in verse 1 of Matthew 18 understand that Jesus might be gone soon, and then who will be in charge? Or while he's around, who will be his number two? They want to know who will be greatest. And Jesus is actually giving his life for them and for us. He is giving, not taking. So the lesson is that we, as his disciples, as his students, we should give our life away rather than grasp for more. But how is this done exactly? Well, he continues in verse 2, Jesus called a little child to him and put the child among them. Then he said, I tell you the truth. Unless you turn from your sins and become like little children, you will never get into the kingdom of heaven. So anyone who becomes as humble as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. He begins by saying, I tell you the truth. It might say in the version you're reading, truly, truly, or verily, verily. There is an emphasis of importance on the thing he's about to say. So this is crucial and should not be ignored. Unless you turn your life completely around, you will not ever get into heaven. You will never get into heaven if you don't turn your life around and become like this little child. So this is serious. And we have to ask ourselves, if we're already following Jesus, have we really turned our lives around to be lowly and humble? How is that playing out in our lives as students or workers or employers? If we haven't turned our life around, we will never get into the kingdom of heaven. There's no debate. There's not just any scraping through. You will never get into the kingdom of heaven if you don't turn your life around and become humble. Has God made it too easy for us just to turn up on a Sunday? Someone's cleaned the meeting place and put the chairs out and set everything ready. The meeting's been organised and all you've got to do is join in with the singing. Is that it? Is that all that's necessary? Or even better, could we just tune in on Zoom? Or has there got to be a massive difference in our life to the way that it was before without Jesus? What have we each turned from and what have we turned to? Have we started attending church meetings on a Sunday rather than washing our car? Do we go to a church meeting on a Sunday rather than going to a car boot sale or a football game? Surely there's more to it than just doing that. Now, Jesus uses a child as an example, and our storybook idea of children isn't really based on reality. Let me make sure you understand, I love my children dearly. They are intelligent. I think actually they're far more intelligent than I am. They are hopefully going to really do well in their studies and whatever their chosen career might be. They're a joy to be around. They're funny. They make me laugh. I love being with them. But I also at times have to drag them out of bed in the morning so that they're on time to get where they need to be. If they snack, they will leave their litter. Or if they've used a cup for a drink or a plate to eat something off when they've made themselves a sandwich, they'll just leave it where they sat for somebody else to come up behind them and clear it up. If they do happen to tidy up, they'll walk past the dishwasher and put the items in the sink instead of putting them in the dishwasher. Or if they see that the dishwasher's full, won't empty it so they can put new things in, they'll just leave it on top. Is Jesus asking us to be like that? Is he asking us to be like those people in our house that leave the lights on in every room they go into, even though they just went in to pick something up? Is that what we're being called to do? Of course not. Jesus isn't being sentimental about children. He's speaking of the child's status in society at that time, and even today actually. It's not about being as innocent as children, because we are not innocent. No one is innocent. We're all guilty of sin. How can you be as innocent as a child? He isn't calling us to do that. In the passage, he says we are to take a lowly position, like a little child has. Children don't contribute to the household, not when they're very young anyway. They don't help to pay the bills, yet they still have to be clothed and fed. They have to be kept safe and made to feel secure. You have to take them from place to place. They can't do it themselves. They are dependent. Have you ever had to fill in an official form? And one of the things will be, how many dependents live in your household? That includes children. They're humble. They're lowly. They are dependent on you. What about you and me? Do we behave like we need God, or can we do fine without him? Are we more concerned with climbing the social ladder so that we look good? School, university and work can give us status in society, and we can use those things to bring us some kind of status. But even if we're successful in those endeavours, it's only temporary. Our relationship with Jesus is eternal, so surely we want to look to what gets us in a good relationship with Jesus. Now, don't get me wrong. If you're a student, I believe you should do your very best in your studies. Don't waste your time whilst you have the opportunity. Seize the opportunity of that education that you've been blessed with being able to have. And be a useful citizen with what you learn. Do well in your work. Pay your way. Become where you're not dependent on others, but can lead your life in a way that you'll be able to pay your own bills and have enough left over to help others who are less fortunate than you. Do not be lazy. It's a sin to be lazy according to the Bible. But here's the thing. The Bible tells us if anyone can work, do it as though you're working for God. So it's good to have an education. It's useful to have a very good job or a career. And I encourage you to be ambitious in doing those things, but only with God at the centre of it all. Do it only as a way of serving God. How can this put you in a position to better speak up for God and talk to people about Jesus? How can you glorify God, though, if, like me, when you leave school, you just go to work in a factory, or very often these days the equivalent, I suppose, will be a supermarket. But I left school and didn't go to university and worked in a plastic vacuum forming factory, which was a 12-hour-a-day thing for 5 days of the week, 6 hours on a Saturday. And the work was so repetitive. Putting a sheet of plastic in a machine, a heater warmed up that plastic, it then went back when you flicked the switch, went down onto a mould that it was vacuum formed to, you cooled it down, took it off, repeated the process, all the while watching the clock, because it wasn't automated. You had to watch the time and flick the button as the minutes went by. How boring. And how do you glorify God in that? Well, we have to lift our eyes up and see what's around. There are ways in which we can be seen to be serving God. When others are complaining about the boss, don't complain. Pray for your employer. Pray for your colleagues as well. You don't have to make a big show of it. Don't stand on the table in the canteen and do it. But pray for them so that your frame of mind is such that these are people that you're trying to help lead to Jesus. And so that will temper your behaviour and speech towards them. Befriend those who are lonely. There's always those who don't fit in any place of employment. Give a good day's work for your pay. Don't cheat your boss. Don't steal. Don't physically take things that don't belong to you. Don't add minutes to your break time. Arrive early and leave late. Stand out for Christ. Even if nobody else notices and there's no reward for doing these things, do it for God because you're pleasing Him. Don't worry about the rest. There is a subtle difference that's going to be seen in your life and the lives of others. And when people ask about it, you can tell them it's because of your relationship with Jesus. Now notice as we carry on in verse 5 and verse 6 of Matthew 18, and anyone who welcomes a little child like this on my behalf is welcoming me. But if you cause one of these little ones who trust in me to fall into sin, it would be better for you to have a large millstone tied around your neck and be drowned in the depths of the sea. It will be wonderful, after humbling yourself before Jesus, for people to welcome you because of it. They'll be doing a good thing. But what happens to those who tempt a child of God into sin? The very thing that Satan did, by the way, in the Garden of Eden. Jesus said, anyone who welcomes a little child like this on my behalf is welcoming me. Consider this. Turn it around. What would happen if you welcomed your teacher as though they were Christ? What about your professor, other students, your employer, your colleagues? How would you behave if it was Jesus you were in the presence of? That's how we should regard others. That's the respect that we should give to other people. And that respect isn't measured by whether they deserve it, but it's measured by whether this would be Jesus and the way we would treat Jesus. A little child, of course, is vulnerable. That's why they're dependent. And when Jesus says a little child like this, when he's demonstrating this to the disciples, he's talking about those who are vulnerable. In that day, it was children, slaves, women. Who is it for us? Various addicts, those who are addicted to different things, the homeless, the abused, the trafficked, the refugees. In the church, who is it? A child is a new Christian. Those newborn in Christ are vulnerable to fall prey to false teaching and attacks from the devil. So we need to protect them all by welcoming them as though we are welcoming Jesus, that person that you're riding next to in the bus, that person you work next to, the one that you are studying next to. Imagine that was Jesus. How would you treat them? Notice in verse 7, what sorrow awaits the world because it tempts people to sin. Temptations are inevitable, but what sorrow awaits the person who does the tempting? Those of you that are going to university, on your arrival, it's likely that you'll be offered vouchers for free entry into nightclubs or money off alcoholic drinks in various venues. It happened to my children. I was furious. No sooner had you moved things into where they're going to live, they're faced with people offering them these things. People go to university at the age of 18. I do wonder if it's a coincidence that that's the age in the UK when people can legally buy and consume alcohol. Let's ask ourselves, who controls this world? These people are leading others into situations that could cause them to sin. I'm not saying that's inevitable. I'm saying that they are making it possible. What happens to people who do that? It would be better, Jesus said, for the people who do that to have a large millstone tied around their neck and be drowned in the depths of the sea, rather than they cause a child of God to stumble. This doesn't just happen at university, of course. Like I said, I left school when I was 15 and went into a factory, and being friendly and welcoming as they saw it, I was invited to go out drinking with the lads. What this involved was, as I said, working 12 hours a day for 5 days, and we got paid weekly in those days, in cash, in a little envelope, and you got your money on a Friday, and so straight from work, many would go and enjoy a drink. They would get into work on a Saturday, and in a comatose state be able to get through the job, because after all it was only flicking a switch on a machine. They would go home and go to sleep, ready to go out that night and drink as much as they possibly can. And that was a great night out, and they wanted me to join them. And I have to tell you, refusing that isn't easy. You can become a bit lonely at work if you don't go along with what everyone else does. You can be looked upon as someone who thinks they are better than them because you don't want to do those things. Even though that might not come from you, that's their view. And you're being led into doing something that could lead you into sin. So we have to be wary of what we're getting involved in and how we're befriending people. But along with being invited to get cheap drinks, certainly as you go to university, you'll also be encouraged to join various groups. And in society, generally, we're asked to join groups as well. But it's quite prevalent within the university situation. You need to be aware of what the groups are promoting. There are those who want to live as they please without any standard of morality as a guide except their own. And among these groups are those who have pride in the title. Pride is something that they are promoting in who they are and what they're doing. I am, of course, against injustice, and I understand why people want to gain respect because they're put down upon in society either now or in the past. And they want the injustice to be put right. And I agree with that. But I would prefer to deal with injustice in society with God's guidance rather than a human idea of being proud. Whilst I'm against injustice, I am not for immorality and the right to live the kind of lifestyle that anyone decides they want to live without respect for other people's feelings. Did you notice in our reading that we're called to be humble or lowly? like a child. The Bible's perspective on pride is that it's a sin. So a group that is coming from that standpoint could easily be involved in sin. In Proverbs chapter 8, verses 12 to 16, this is written as though wisdom is talking to us. And it says, I, wisdom, live together with good judgment. I know where to discover knowledge and discernment. All who fear the Lord will hate evil. Therefore I hate pride and arrogance, corruption and perverse speech. Common sense and success belong to me. Insight and strength are mine. Because of me, kings reign and rulers make just decrees. Rulers lead with my help, and nobles make righteous judgments. There is pride, or there's wisdom. You can't have both. So we mustn't align ourselves to what God calls sin. Again, in Proverbs 16 and verse 18, it says, pride goes before destruction, and haughtiness before a fall. There is no room for arrogance over who we are or what we do. Pride is a thing of the world, and the world will not resolve its problems with pride. Pride is about drawing attention to yourself, demanding respect without having done anything to really warrant it. A demand for respect regardless of lifestyle. Again, let me emphasise, I understand the motives of people who feel they've been wronged and cry out for justice where there's been injustice. But I would make the appeal to all of us, instead of having anything to do with the promotion of pride, something the Bible speaks against, let's help people the way Jesus leads us and guides us and gives us the example to. Jesus and his wisdom hold the answer, not pride. Let me ask, which group in society are we specifically helping when we love our neighbour as ourselves? Which group in society are we singling out and highlighting the differences of when we love our neighbour as ourselves? You see, that doesn't single out a particular group. It is something that is inclusive of everyone, even you, if someone else is loving their neighbour and you're their neighbour. Everyone is welcome, not just a group or a small section of society, but love your neighbour means everyone, including you. It is not one demand from one over another, but it is true equality. In verse 8, Jesus goes on to say, so if your hand or foot causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It's better to enter eternal life with only one hand or one foot than to be thrown into eternal fire with both of your hands and feet. And if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. It's better to enter eternal life with only one eye than to have two eyes and be thrown into the fire of hell. Are we here being called to be the church of the one-eyed, one-armed people? Of course we're not. The emphasis here is that we should do whatever it takes to ensure we do not sin. Don't physically cut your hand off, but do whatever you need to do to make sure you do not sin. Whatever it takes, do it so you will not sin. Get it out of your mind, get it out of your body, your life. Fight with all your might to keep sin away from yourself. No matter how painful it is to cut sin out of your life, because that might mean having to separate ourselves from people who we're actually friendly with. But we've got to do whatever it takes. It's less painful than letting sin fester and rule in your life and then meeting the punishment that is reserved for those who stay in their sin. Jesus uses or talks about hell or Gehenna. Some historians say the word used here speaks of a place outside of the city where the rubbish burned day and night. Maybe this was true, maybe it's not. We don't really know. But what we know for sure is that the place where the pagan priests were put to death by King Josiah at the height of Israel's apostasy was here, and was perhaps what Jesus meant. By Jesus' day, this place had become a metaphor for the judgment of God against idolatry and injustice. God will deal with sin and burn it away in the last judgment, once and for all. He will put right the injustice And that's good news. When Jesus said, chop it off or gouge it out, the point was to shock us into taking sin seriously. Sin is real, but it's temporary, so put God first. And we put God first by humbling ourselves rather than being proud about ourselves. The desire to be the greatest and have status in the world causes a lot of damage along the way. That desire is often what leads to sin, arrogance, crookedness. Why do we have wars? Well, one country wants to be greater than the other. Why do we fight? Well, one person wants to be greater than the other. Why are people exploited? The exploiter wants to be greater than the other. How do we combat all of these problems in society? Jesus said it is to turn and be like a child, be lowly, be humble, be respectful, welcome others as though they are Christ. Don't cause anyone else to stumble into sin, and do everything you possibly can not to sin yourself. Jesus does not rebuke the disciples' desire to be great. Rather, he redefines it. We all want to matter. We all want to leave the world a better place than we found it. And Jesus makes it possible for every single person to do that. Everyone can do it, but by his definition. That means greatness is not about status, but it's more about service. Not about how high we are up in the hierarchy, but how humble we are. It's not about greed and grasping for control or power, but it's about gratitude. It's not about taking in order to improve your life, but about giving your life. Whether you're at school or university, at work, at play, even in retirement, we can all be great. You just have to become like a little child. Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up.